So I'm trying to get a head around it was a tall order.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for the 2 or 3 minutes delay. We just had to get the technology right. So hopefully we're now up and running, as you might say. Welcome to the Nottinghamshire Police and Crime Panel this afternoon. Welcome everyone. Welcome Commissioner and team. Welcome Chief Constable and team, and welcome members. So if we can start with item 1, the minutes of the last meeting held on the 8th of February, pages 3 to 20. Can I propose those from the chair? Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Truancy, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just around question 5, I'd just like to state that I believe there was a little more detail to the question, but that said, I am arranging a meeting shortly with the Police Commissioner, so I don't want to labour the point, but I think the discussion was around North Notts specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Perhaps if needs be, you'll come back at the next meeting for any point of clarification. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Councillor Truancy. If there are no other questions on those minutes, can I move to item 2, the confirmation hearing? Oh yes, sorry, I'm forgetting my process. Everyone happy to accept those minutes with that particular amendment? Thank you. Thank you. Then that's item 2, minutes of the confirmation hearing for the post of Chief Executive, pages 21 to 27. Again, can I propose those from the chair? Thank you. Any questions, anyone? In that case, the motion's carried. Item 3, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you. We have a couple of apologies this afternoon, one from Suma Harding and one from Matt Abrahams. We also have Councillor Edwards here who's substituting for Councillor Khan.
Thank you. Can we move then to item 4, declarations of interest by any members or officers? First of all, to disclosable pecuniary interests. Councillor.
Yeah, I've got a non-pecuniary interest as a ambassador for the VRU. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other declarations? In that case, any declarations for private interest, pecuniary or non-pecuniary? I see none identified. Thank you. In that case, then, can we move to the work programme? Item 5, page 29 to 34.
Thank you. Just a couple of little bits to highlight within the work programme report. Within the report, we have some suggested dates for the panel meetings following the AGM for this year, which was agreed last year. We've got a couple of changes to bring to you this afternoon following consultation with colleagues at Nottingham City Council. And it's therefore asking the panel to approve the meetings with a change to the September meeting from the 12th to the 19th, and the November meeting changing from the 14th to the 21st. In terms of other items within the work programme report, just to highlight for you that we are looking for any willing volunteers to come and be part of the annual report work programme group. If you don't want to commit yourselves now, then please make yourselves known via email, and everything else really is very much as presented within that report.
Thank you. So we take any questions on the work programme? If not, there are 5 recommendations. I'll just read those out quickly. The work programme is updated with member suggestions. That we look for a development session to consider all the strategic reports that have been received before the annual general meeting on the 6th of June. So we may just have to pick a date and hope that a number of members can attend. The process for the preparation of response to the policing protocols, consultation, that a subgroup be produced to look at the annual report again, and the dates that have been explained to you in terms of requests from our colleagues at the City Council. Are people content to accept those recommendations? And I see a show of hands. Thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. That takes us to item 6, and it's with great pleasure that we can welcome our colleague from the Violence Reduction Unit. Natalie Baker-Swift is currently head of the Violence Reduction Unit. Thank you very much for the paper that we've had in our papers that we've read, and for the handout that you've given us this afternoon. We don't get a chance, I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions for you at the end. We may come up with a few more we might send to you in due course, but on behalf of everyone here, welcome. We're really looking forward for hearing your presentation. I don't know, you're not near a microphone, are you? It's about it to go. Oh, I think your colleague behind is offering you one. Yeah. Do you want to just press the button at the front, Natalie, then check?
1, 2. Okay. Is that okay? Can everybody hear me? Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Chair, for coming to present on the Violence Reduction Unit. I think I have been to a panel, but it was maybe 2 years ago or so, to talk about the VRU when we first set up in 2019, and just really grateful for the opportunity to present on our progress to date. So just a little bit of an overview of the presentation. I'll give members a bit of a background of who the VRU are and what our remit and purpose is, our progress during this financial year, and also planned activity as we move forward. We should be sharing on the screen, but please shout up if it stalls at all, and hopefully we'll be okay. So the background, the purpose and remit of the Violence Reduction Unit, we set up in 2019 under the Police and Crime Commissioner. So funding was granted by the Home Office. There are 18 violence reduction units in England and Wales, of which we are one. Essentially, our purpose is to lead and the strategic coordination of our local response to serious violence, focusing very much on prevention and early intervention rather than enforcement. So up until now, we've received an annual funding of £880,000 for £1 million in 2022-23, and I'll provide a little bit more detail of what that looks like in subsequent years. Essentially, what that funding pays for are interventions to support children and young people in the city and county up to the age of 25 years who may be impacted by serious violence already, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do in that regard. Research and evaluation, finding out actually what works to tackle serious violence. This is very much an emerging strand of work in the UK. Data sharing and analysis, so to understand the nature and the trends and the causes of serious violence in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, and then very much focused on system change, so what we can do as a partnership to reduce and prevent serious violence. So just to touch on our principles briefly, we take what's called a public health approach, which is I think a term that's used quite commonly these days. But essentially, there are some broad principles which makes the VRU a public health approach, and that's focusing on populations rather than individuals. So what difference can we make across a whole system and populations and communities, recognising that some communities may be more disproportionately impacted by serious violence and the causes of serious violence than others. We work as a whole system rather than as individual agencies. So we sit under the Police and Crime Commissioner, but the Violence Reduction Unit, I think the unit word is slightly misleading because we are a partnership of organisations, and I'll talk you through who is in that partnership shortly. We intervene early to prevent issues emerging in the first place. So if you see that orange quote to the right-hand side, violence is preventable, and we work on that basis. We believe that prevention is better than a cure. We consider the causes of the causes, and by causes of the causes we mean the risk factors that may lead a child, a young person, a whole community to be more impacted by serious violence than another. And we ensure that our work is evidence-informed. And by that, it means that we can make the greatest impact on our communities by, yes, testing things out and being innovative, but also really building on the evidence that is out there, but ourselves also, with our interventions, we evaluate them to also add to that local evidence base. So in terms of multi-agency working, so we report to the Strategic Violence Reduction Board, which is chaired by Commissioner Henry, and we are aligned to key partnerships in the city and county, including the Crime and Drugs Partnership in the city and the Safer Knots Board in the county, as well as both health and wellbeing boards and safeguarding partnerships. So on our board, we have senior representatives from a number of key organisations, and they are there essentially as system leaders. So they have an interest and an influence around serious violence and its causes, but they're able to influence the whole system so that we're able to make long-term change rather than just short-term wins as a system. So we have the Children's Services, Directors of Children's Services for the city and county, who also represent youth justice, Directors of Public Health for the city and county, the CCG, education, so we have the principals of West Notts College and Nottingham College, the Chief Constable, the Governor of Nottingham Prison, and also probation. And there are also a number of other organisations that sit on our board that we really feel can add value to this agenda, such as the Major Trauma Unit at Nottingham University Hospitals, because they see frontline actually what's happening and are really able to influence that change and bring a sort of real reality to what we're doing as a partnership. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the sort of key work streams that we're leading on currently. The trauma-informed strategy, there's a picture up there with a slightly sort of jumbled jigsaw in that person's mind on the left-hand side. In 2020, the VRU as a partnership essentially signed up to becoming a trauma-informed city and county. So why is this important to us? We know that communities and we know that individuals who experience trauma and don't receive the right support to recover from that trauma and to self-regulate that trauma may show signs of emotions, behaviours, and take risks that otherwise they wouldn't necessarily choose to take. And that is as a result often of what we call adverse childhood experiences. There's a lot of research that's been done in the UK and abroad into adverse childhood experiences. For example, we know that someone with 7 or more adverse childhood experiences is more likely to have become or been incarcerated at some point in their life. We know that somebody with 11 adverse childhood experiences is perhaps more likely to become involved in criminal activity. Now, I don't want to give the impression that there's a causal pathway there. There are absolutely protective factors that can be realised to protect somebody from going down a potentially negative pathway. But what we're trying to do as a system is, one, prevent people from experiencing trauma in the first place, but also, if they have experienced that, how can we support them to achieve the best possible outcomes? So often in the VRU, we talk about a trauma-informed lens, and that's essentially everybody that we meet. Could be a member of your staff in your organisation. It could be someone you meet as a practitioner, as a social worker, in youth justice. Look at that individual through that trauma-informed lens and understand the journey that they have been on and why they may be behaving the way that they are. So in order to make a difference across the whole system, it's important that we have a strategy that enables us to look at our policy, our practice, our ways of working, the training that's given to our staff within organisations to ensure that they can look through that trauma-informed lens. And as a system, by taking that approach, we may be able to reduce trauma and therefore serious violence as a whole. So we have a clinical specialist in the team, Donna Stanton-Groves, who is leading on that strategy, and that's being presented back to the Strategic Violence Reduction Board on Thursday this week for sign-off. We will then pull together an implementation steering group who will implement that strategy across Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. Another key strand for us is youth work. I talked about the evidence base around serious violence being very much emerging. One thing that we do absolutely know works is if a young person has access to a trusted adult, it can absolutely be life-changing. It can really ensure that that young person is on a positive pathway, and where they have experienced risk factors already, they can remain on that positive pathway and can potentially divert them from negative consequences and becoming involved in serious violence and crime. So this year and towards the end of 2020, we've worked with the National Youth Agency, with the voluntary and community sector in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, and also with young people to create a youth work strategy for our voluntary and community services. One of the key documents that came out of that work is our youth charter. Myself and the Commissioner went to Parliament in November and had the absolute pleasure of presenting this during the start of National Youth Work Week. Essentially, the Youth Charter sets out what children and young people's expectations are around youth work, that they want to be respected, that they want to be listened to, that they want to be empowered, that they want to be developed, everything I'm sure you can agree we'd absolutely all want. So the Youth Charter is the sort of central pillar to the youth work strategy. And then building on that, we've created a quality endorsement framework. So currently, within the voluntary and community sector, we're really lucky in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire that we have an absolute thriving sector. What we don't have currently is consistent access to workforce development for those VCS providers. And when you're working with our most vulnerable children and young people, that's absolutely crucial to make sure that they receive the high quality of service that they deserve. So the quality endorsement framework is essentially a framework that enables VCS practitioners and organisations to develop against. And then accompanying that, we have training pathways. So anything that we ask a VCS organisation to do as part of that framework, for example, safeguarding, which is absolutely key, we ensure that they've got access to that training free of charge and at a time that suits them. But it also works into sort of more key specialist areas of development, for example, outreach, and if you're undertaking sports diversion, for example. So it's quite an innovative project. We're the first area in the UK to have done this. and it's been really, really successfully received by voluntary and community sector. They've co-produced this with us, so it's not about working against or for our communities, it's working with our communities. And that is very much the sort of focus of our implementation as we move forward into 22-23. I mentioned that we also commission interventions. So 40% of our funding during this financial year has gone into interventions. You can see on that triangle on the left-hand side, we start with primary interventions. So that might be the universal interventions such as educational and awareness raising. So where a young person doesn't necessarily have any risk factors at this time, but we need to talk to them about the consequences and the reality of becoming engaged in knife crime or serious violence more broadly, and how to protect themselves and their peers. Secondary prevention is where a young person potentially may be known to agencies. They have emerging risks that may, and I say may because again it's not causal, cause them to be involved in serious violence. And we will work with them through counselling, through mentoring, through targeted outreach, and through sports and creative diversionary activities. And that's very much to engage that young person and ensure they've got access to that trusted adult, that they're safe, that they can access safe spaces, and that they get the support that they need, and whatever that might be needed from a holistic approach. And then right at the tip of the pyramid, we have tertiary prevention. So that's young people aged up to 25 years who may already be impacted by serious violence. For example, we have 2 custody interventions that run in the city and county, and they're very much focused. One is youth justice led. That is been implemented in custody in city and county from the autumn and goes live fully on the 1st of April. We managed to bid in for a further 1.4 million funding this year for a youth justice-led intervention, and essentially that's to identify young people in custody and to support them holistically to access speech and language therapy, to access restorative practice, and to access 24/7 mentoring in the community. Speech and language is really important. For example, we know in our youth justice cohorts in the city and county, 83% of young people have speech and language needs, so it's incredibly high. So we're really keen to support their development. And also A&E diversion through Red Thread. So that's just an example of some of our interventions. There are 28 running across the city and county currently. The way that looks across as a split in the city and county, we have 18 in the city currently and 10 in the county, but we're really keen to start to improve that in areas of the county as well. Excuse me, I've had a cold for a few days if I sound a bit croaky. So far this year, we've reached 2,799 children and young people aged 5 to 25. And some of the outcomes that are described there see a reduction in violent incidents in those participating, increased access to appropriate pathways of support. That could be counselling, that could be housing, that could be financial, reduced offending or reoffending, improved emotional resilience, mental health and well-being, decreased substance misuse, and really crucially, improved readiness to access education, training and employment. We know that once a young person's excluded from education or stops attending school, the risk of them being exploited or becoming involved in serious violence can absolutely increase exponentially. Just to bring this to life, I've put in the orange box on the right-hand side a case study of a young man called M for the purposes of today. He was under 25 years, he was arrested and ended up in custody, and he was met by one of our mentors from one of our volunteer projects. He had really bad addiction issues, as he describes himself. When he met his mentor, he was in an unstable housing situation and potentially homeless. He had poor relationships with family and peers, and his mental health, as he described it, was all over the place. With support from mentors, he was able to restart his education, register with a GP, start to tackle his addiction habits. He's not reoffended since taking part in the intervention, and that's been 9 months now. He's attending the gym, which is really helping with his physical and his mental health. He's got stable accommodation. And as he describes, he sees the mentors as a real support, and without that, I don't like to think what would have happened, and those are his words. And we have many case studies like that that show it's good to see data, and I can always bring data, but I think the richness of it that the case study brings us is really important. One of the other things that the VRU do are creating data and insight in regards to serious violence. So we have a public health consultant in the team, Helen Johnston, who produces our serious violence strategic needs assessment. And essentially that provides insight, looking at data, contextual data, health data, crime data and other partnership data across Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, as well as engagement with communities, so qualitative data, to understand where we need to be focusing our activity and where there may be needs. So just to touch on a couple of these, and I can absolutely circulate our strategic needs assessment for any of those who are interested in reading the full document. But we are continuing to assess the impacts of COVID-19 on the risk factors and patterns of serious violence. We know that COVID-19 and associated restrictions have exponentially increased risk for children and young people. And we may see that play out for years to come. So how can we best protect those young people, and how can we understand what those risks are? We're carrying a deep dive on violence, including sexual violence occurring within victims aged 15 to 19, because there are a high number of victims, 8.5% in that age group. We're exploring the relationship between violence that occurs in public spaces and violence that occurs in domestic settings, and understand the interrelation and whether it's the same people committing that violence and how we can prevent that from occurring. We're also assessing the issues associated with pressures on the criminal justice system. Again, another factor that has been increased with COVID-19 and restrictions. When a young person is going through the criminal justice process, it's traumatic anyway. But if it's delayed because of a delay on the system, then that can obviously increase that, not only for perpetrators, but of course for victims too. I'm just conscious of time, so I won't go through all the bullet points, but please come back to me if you want any more detail. So I talked about data being very important, but we also undertake qualitative research. So this year we commissioned the Institute of Public Safety, Crime and Justice at the University of Northampton to undertake a qualitative study exploring serious violence in Nottinghamshire. There are a number of themes that we look to explore, including victims and perpetrators, young people, children and young people with special educational needs who we know are particularly vulnerable, and also emerging communities. And it's a really insightful report, which again I can provide if anybody is interested in reading the detail of that. It was it confirmed a lot of the areas in which we're currently focusing, including trauma, including education, and including creating really high quality youth services. But there was also some other things that highlighted for us where we need to really start to focus our activity as well. We've also undertaken some gender-based violence research. So we're exploring the impact of witnessing domestic violence on boys' beliefs and behaviours. So where they grow up in a home where there is domestic violence, how does this impact them? What are the protective factors that can stop them from becoming a perpetrator themselves? And how do we break that cycle? And that's being carried out by Juno Women's Aid and Nottingham Trent University. And finally, Equation and Nottingham City Council are engaging girls and young women to understand their experiences of serious violence and exploitation. I talked a little bit about the funding that we've received. So for the first year, we have a multi-year funding settlement, which I think shows the confidence that the Home Office put in the activity that VRUs are undertaking. So next year, we have 1.4 million. The year after, so 23-24, that slightly decreases to 1.05 million and then 1.04 million the year after. And there's also an expectation of match funding from the partnership, which increases incrementally over that 3-year period. This has been absolutely invaluable for us. Not only does it give us more sustainability as a partnership, but also the providers that we're working with gives them an awful lot more sustainability. And one thing we have been able to do this year, Commissioner, I don't know if you want to talk about the funding.
I think we've spoken before about how important it is to do that legacy work, not the short-term work, which is why we need to do the longer-term funding.
Yeah.
So that's.
And with the Make Not Safe grants this year, for the first time, we've been able to do a 3-year funding settlement, haven't we?
Yeah. Which will make a massive difference. It will mean that our partners aren't spending all their time filling application forms in to try and get funding, but also that we'll be evaluating and making sure that every penny is spent wisely. And also, by having that evaluation, hopefully it makes these projects more sustainable because they'll be able to prove that they are delivering.
Thank you. And I'm just going to finish on a final slide, a very busy slide, apologies, and it may be too small to read on the screen, but hopefully I'll also have a printout in front of you. So from the strategic needs assessment that I described, we have formed our response strategy for the next 3 years. This slide here shows our strategic framework, so our vision, our mission and the principles which I spoke through earlier. Essentially, there are 3 pillars to this strategy. The first sits under the priority of providing inclusive system leadership, and that's the space that the Violence Reduction Unit, under the chair of the Commissioner, really need to be working in, is how can we make long-term change across the system rather than just focusing on short-term wins. One of the key activities that we'll be delivering this year is the implementation of the serious violence duty on behalf of the partnership. So this is part of the Police Crime and Courts Bill, which is due to receive royal assent in the spring. The serious violence duty essentially requests, or mandates rather, legislates that every area of the UK will essentially have to produce a serious violence strategic needs assessment to understand the causes of serious violence and the trends in their area, that they will produce a response strategy, and that they will work as a partnership to share data and intelligence to respond and prevent serious violence. As you can see, as a VRU area, we're already ahead of the curve. So we will be leading on this on behalf of the partnership and bringing in additional attendees to the board, including fire and rescue, both CSPs, and under the convening authority of the Police and Crime Commissioner. We'll be implementing the trauma strategy and the youth work strategy, which I've talked about. Under Make Best Use of Data Sharing, Insight and Evidence, we will be developing a 3-year plan to ensure that we've got the best possible access to quality data. For example, currently ethnicity data isn't routinely recorded on a consistent basis, or it's self-reported or assumed, so we don't actually have a full picture of what disproportionality looks like. So that's a key area for us. But we need to ensure that our systems are speaking to each other so that we can be responsive as a partnership. We'll also be commissioning further research and building on the research that I've talked about, including the gender-based research, and designing and implementing a performance monitoring framework. And on top of that, we will be delivering and evaluating early intervention and prevention activity. So just a snapshot of some of the interventions that we have there. So standardised educational interventions, place-based interventions, so not necessarily just focusing on individuals, but physical spaces. So ensuring that we look at physical spaces through a contextual safeguarding point of view, and ensuring that we can keep young people safe, whether it be in a park or at a bus stop, whatever that might be. Environmental factors. We will be commissioning trauma-informed interventions. So currently we commission work through Juno and Women's Aid to support children and young people growing up in a home witnessing domestic violence. We'll be commissioning that for the next 3 years and evaluating it to understand the impact. Custody-based interventions, as I described those 2 earlier, will be continuing until at least 2025. We're also exploring a focused deterrence model, which we've put into funding bid, supported by the broader partnership. A focused deterrence essentially aims to undertake targeted work, focusing on a group dynamic, so urban street groups, those young people who are perhaps most vulnerable in our communities, who may be causing or having the most harm caused to them, that they're actually often causing the most serious violence. And we're looking at how we can disrupt their relationships with organised crime groups in partnership with the force. And also we're continuing to fund and evaluate the domestic violence perpetrator intervention. again, I'm more than happy, excuse me, I'm cold. I'm more than happy to share our response strategy if anybody would like to see the detail behind this. It's being signed off by the Strategic Violence Reduction Board on Thursday and then will be published on our website. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Natalie. That was excellent. What a superb project you've been involved with.
Thank you.
And the influence that you have over people's lives by this sort of strategy is enormous. So I'm sure that one or two people want to ask questions. But Bob Vaughan Newton and Councillor Smith first.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a very keen advocate for preventative work, and you've clearly put a lot of thought into that. I've got questions for the Commissioner, but I've just got one for you first, Natalie, and it's just a technical one. On the funding slide, at the bottom of the first column, the 2022-23, the figure is lower, despite you appearing to have some match funding, which should bring it up.
So the match funding, excuse me, the match funding is actually based on our core grant for this year, rather than a percentage of the core grant in 23-24. So the match funding is 15% of the 880,000 core grant, rather than 15% of the 23-24 core grant.
Okay.
Unfortunately,
I was just wondering how you got from 1.4 million to 1.36 million by adding 88,000.
That's a technical error, and thank you for noticing it. Thank you.
Okay.
Very good point.
Right. Later in this meeting, we'll be considering your update report, Commissioner. And it talks about increases in the level of police-recorded violent crime following a rise in the last quarter. So I've got three questions, really. Are you satisfied that the measures currently in place are sufficient and that this is just a blip? And how will you be monitoring the ongoing position? What do you see as a trigger for adjusting your response? And how are you monitoring the services commissioned through the VRU? And what opportunities do you see to reverse this direction of travel?
Thank you very much. Can I just check which figures are you referring to exactly?
Page 45 of the pack, it's para 3.7. In terms of performance outcomes, levels of police-recorded violent knife crime increased marginally in the year to December 2021, went up by 3% or 25 incidents, following a rise in the latest quarter. Similarly, the number of first-time entrants into the youth justice system has also increased.
Thank you. It's just useful to see the context of that. They are small numbers, but I don't want them going that way. So with regard to how we monitor this, we are actually increasing the governance that we are doing. We're going to be having more accountability meetings once a month on the back of the police and crime plan. We've all the things that I wanted to get delivered. We're going to be red, amber, greening them, and absolutely asking questions and measuring them. With regard to how I check the services that are commissioned by the VRU, that's ongoing with our commissioning team, but it is one of the reasons that I need to increase the size of our commissioning team, because we've only got two people there at the moment, so we do need to increase the commissioning team to be able to really look into this more. Anything to add?
I think, is it fair to say, Caroline, that you consider the measures in place at the moment in terms of monitoring to be sufficient? However, that will be kept under review as we move forward. So we keep a close eye on the performance if we're not satisfied that we've got the right measures in place, we will look to tweak them in future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith and Councillor Edwards, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got two really quick questions for Natalie. Forgive me if this has been discussed at some other point as part of this process, but you vaguely touched on truancy. I was just wondering, are we doing any work with the secondary schools and academy trusts to see if there's a direct correlation between students with a poor level of attendance and high levels of truancy, and working with their truancy officers? Because I know it wasn't a criminal case, but there was a case where a child was refusing to go to school for completely different reasons. But the truancy officer went out, spoke to them, and the kid said, "I'm not going," and they went, "Okay," and just went off again. So I think we need to do a bit more work with the truancy officers, and I don't know how we do that, but I just wondered if that's something that you're doing. But the other thing is, I know you tend to hear it a lot more in American TV programs, but they do the Big Brother, Big Sister scheme. Is that something we've looked at as part of the VRU, to introduce a Big Brother, Big Sister scheme? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Smith. So to answer your first question, we do have a gap currently in terms of attendance data and in terms of exclusion data. So currently, alternative provisions and academies aren't compelled to share their data with us, so this is a gap. However, the serious violence duty means that there will be a legislative imperative to do that, which is very positive, so we can understand, we can look at that data and understand need. So, and as part of that, we'll be picking that up through a broader education work stream, which will look to identify risk factors earlier on, such as truancy, to reduce the risk of a young person then potentially being excluded, and so on and so forth. So absolutely, we recognise that as a gap, and I think liaising with truancy officers and with our schools and early intervention officers who we're working more closely with this year, there are lots of opportunities there. With regard to the Big Brother, Big Sister scheme, we do have something running in schools in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire called Mentors in Violence Prevention, and that's essentially an educational intervention which seeks to create peer mentors for children and young people. Essentially, it's a bystander scheme, so it doesn't just focus on serious violence, it focuses on bullying, potential sort of arguments within a play, sort of small fry things that can escalate, and supports children and young people how to advise their peers on staying safe and being able to manage those situations and manage conflict. That is an intervention that was brought in Scotland, the Scottish VRU, and we're now testing in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire.
Commissioner, did you want to come in at that point? Yeah.
Excellent question, Councillor Smith, and it is something we're looking at. Scarily, there's nearly 8,000 children at risk of being excluded from school at the moment in Nottinghamshire. That's a huge number, and we know the moment they're excluded puts them at a lot more risk. So it's absolutely on our radar. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards, thank you.
Thank you. There was a murder in the Meadows in November. The reaction in my community was very clear. It was that we needed to do more about the youth club that we've got. And I guess it was driven by that sense of the faith that people do have in youth workers. We just had a guy called Carl White, who for decades led youth work in the Meadows, incredibly respected. He's died in hospital, unfortunately. But in a way, I think you put it in your presentation better than I've ever heard it. Access to a trusted adult can transform a young person's life. So you put it very well. So there's this great, enormous sense of sadness that we have at the City Council at the moment. We can't sustain the kind of services that we know are needed. Compared to where we were 12 years ago, our grant from national government is down by over £100 million a year. If you think that's 55 city councillors, it's something like £2 million for every city council. The Meadows, for instance, loses £4 million a year compared to where we were 12 years ago. That sense that therefore we can be part of some great mission to tackle these issues when we are so reduced on resources. a bit daunting, a bit depressing. Nevertheless, we try. What I would just ask, and this is on the basis of nothing than a trip to the football, witnessing some of the events post a couple of Forest games recently, witnessing the events after the World Championship boxing fight, and also just walking the dog round the pubs late at night because we live right in the city centre. Is there something going on with growing use of cocaine, both in the country but in the city? Is there a sufficient focus amongst all our partners about doing something about that? Perhaps beyond the kind of level of which I've been advised by one security guard at a pub, which is you need to apply lots of Vaseline to the level surfaces in toilets so that people can't snort lines of cocaine. I don't know enough about these things, but I would be grateful for some kind of advice on what it is, whether it is an issue, whether it's a significant issue, whether it's something that's on its way up and we need to tackle it, nip it in the bud, or whether there is something to be done about it. So 2 points really, just an expression of regret that the City Council can't be doing more on this issue because we know more needs to be done. But then there's this question of, is growing use of cocaine feeding a new wave of violence? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and I agree with your opening statement about the simple strapline that I think has a deep meaning. I thought that was an excellent bit. I've got Mrs. Dolby, then Councillor Ellis, then Councillor Camilleri, then Councillor Woodings. I told you there'd be a lot of questions, so if we could start with Leslie Dolby, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Natalie. I thought it was an excellent presentation, and my question's actually partly been asked by Councillor Smith, but I'm referring to exclusions and permanent exclusions from schools, because when academies take over a school, they often see a way of improving performance by introducing permanent exclusions. And I know of a school that's coming into the county soon, an academy that is actually going to do that. And so I want to know the speed of which your team could get into work in those schools to prevent this happening, or actually get a mentor for the individuals as they're excluded, because we do know the consequences of exclusions. And I do see probably the numbers related to the number of academies in the school, in the area, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Dolby. I mean, certainly it's a culture change and a system change focus, so I can't promise that at speed we will be able to reduce exclusions, but certainly working with academies through the serious violence duty, I think we've got a real opportunity for them to start sharing data with us so we can start to understand the problem. I think often with schools there is this pull between Ofsted and performance and safeguarding children and young people. So certainly it's a really big focus for us this year, and we recognise the risk factors around it. Can I say we will resolve the issue this year? No, but I do think there is an opportunity through the serious violence duty to start to really work in that area with schools. And we're also bringing an education specialist in the team specifically to focus on that issue.
And at least if you can't pick them up before they're excluded, at least if you know the individuals, you can probably help them afterwards.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, we do some work with the Children's Society, who specifically support children and young people from multiple disadvantaged backgrounds. There were in that cohort of young people, there were 10. When they went back to school after the pandemic, 5 were excluded. The Children's Society, who are commissioned on behalf of the Commissioner and the VRU, actually advocated for those children and their parents, and 5 of them were reinstated in school. So we do some quick time active work, but I think there's more that we can do as a system, certainly.
And just a very quick question on top of that is, have you got data relating to children missing in education? Because since COVID, that's increased considerably.
And again, I think that's something else that will improve with the duty. Apologies, it feels like we're putting a lot of reliance on that, but actually there isn't an imperative for schools to share that information with us currently, and I do think that will improve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Natalie, for the report and the presentation. I suppose it'd be remiss of me not to mention Deb Wakelin and the contribution he made in getting the unit off the ground, just in case he's watching. I'd like to pick up the last question or last response about the reliance on the new duties. Question for the Commissioner. Can you unpack that a little bit more? Can you tell us how you see the duty working, what sort of difference you see it making? How do you see the CSPs discharging their responsibility? I take the point that we've got a head start being one of the 18. Will there be any new burdens funding for this, or is there resources coming through your office, and how's all that going to be managed?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. To be clear, the duty is not on the VRU. The duty is on our partners. But we have the excellent head of the VRU, and I can use my convening powers to pull people together. And unless there's a statutory duty, sometimes like education, as we've spoken about, don't give us the data that we need to make a difference. So I do see that as that we'll have some power to when we ask our questions. And with regard to funding, I'd love to say there was loads of funding coming with it, but that's not been identified. But there are pockets of funding, such as the From Harm to Hope funding that will be coming out to councils and public health with regard to drugs. And I've already got a meeting set up with the head of public health in the city and the county to see if we can join that up as part of this duty.
I suppose my immediate reaction is just disappointment, but not the Commissioner. My reaction is disappointment, not the Commissioner, but the government is imposing a new duty, and new burdens doesn't seem to apply. I mean, are you confident that there are resources within your plan to meet what we would need to do as a partnership?
Yes, I am. We were really careful when we put our budget together. It is one of the reasons I do need to slightly increase my team to be able to do this.
Thank you. Councillor Camilleri, thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. It was an excellent presentation, and things came out of that I think most of you already know, that most crime comes from deprivation and poor education. And coming from that area myself, I probably covered 10 of the points that you said that takes you to go to court, to go to prison, where some of my friends did 11 and went to prison. I'd just like to say, when you're at school, when you are one of those children, you're ignored, you're sidelined, teachers don't want to talk to you. You can sometimes not be unintelligent, by the way. You can be handling yourself very well, and they just don't like you as a person. That is a sign. But I'm glad you're starting to recognise that. And but we've always known it. We've always known that a mentor, one teacher can change your life. One good person can change your life. We've always known. So that's nothing new. But well done for bringing it up. But the other thing is what I don't understand is when you give all this data out, you don't separate it into different districts and different areas for us to look at. The report comes on that crime's gone up, diddly-dee, what we are, where we are, but I don't know whether it's been a kick up in Bassetlaw or in Ashfield or, in fact, in Rushcliffe. I want to know where it is, because I'm a Mansfield County Councillor and I have a deep feeling for my town, and I want to know how is that doing. And I was a bit worried I might have missed it in this copious report, but I don't think it's there, and I would like to see it separated. Is there any way we can do this? Please, Commissioner.
We do see it separated out, but I'm not sure how much can be shared.
Yes, so just to confirm, Councillor Camilleri, so we do see quite a lot of granular data as sometimes it's difficult to share that level of data, and there can be public interest issues that prevent us from doing that. I think the general point, though, in terms of publishing that information and sharing it with partners is something we're absolutely committed to. I suppose there's another point there in terms of analytical capability and just ensuring that we've got that in place as well. And we're not currently there at the moment. So between those two things, there are some issues that prevent us.
Could I just go back? Yeah, it's good, but don't you think that that kind of information would help? Would help. I know it would help me. I don't know if it would help the others. Just to know where the high levels of crime are, like Council said down there about cocaine. Is there more cocaine use in Nottingham? I don't know. It could be any. It could be somewhere in Worcester. But I really haven't got a clue, and I don't think that helps us. I really don't. But that's my opinion, and I hope you look at it.
This might not be the right thing to say, but if we said where all the really high use of cocaine is that where all the drug dealers are going to go to?
I think what was unclear, just listening to the dialogue there, it was unclear as to the real reasons why you couldn't share. There's different issues, isn't there? There's what you can share in a public forum, and there's things that perhaps on a one-to-one basis that impact on people being able to undertake their elected roles, that maybe there's a different way of sharing some of that information. And I think that was what was being asked for, not necessarily that it always has to be in a public arena. I appreciate, because individuals may be involved, and obviously data protection covers lots of things, but I just wonder if there's a dialogue outside the meeting that might help and ameliorate some of this issue.
Yeah. But if I could just echo what my Chief Executive Officer said, the analytical capacity at the moment is very slim in our office to be able to share that. Just bear with us until we build a team, please.
I think I understood that your own resources are a little limited at the moment.
Yeah.
I think it was more the broader question of, once you've got those staffing in post, is that then an enabler to addressing some of the issues that has been raised? I think that was what I was trying to seek.
Joe might be able to help answer that question. At the Mansfield-Ashfield Strategic Partnership, I can't remember what it's exactly called now, that information is shared. So if you have a chat with, is it Marianne, the portfolio holder for Mansfield, she's got that information in breakdown for Mansfield.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, I think that's something you need to ask outside the forum. Yeah. If you've got access to it, perhaps you can share that with your colleague.
Yeah, if I can just come back. Sorry, Chair, you said it far more articulately than I did, but it was exactly that point that it's not our data. Yes, it's really helpful to partners. We don't disagree on that point, but it's not necessarily data that we can publish. It does remain sensitive. However, it is, as Councillor Smith has really helpfully pointed out, actually, it is shared at community safety partnership levels. So in local areas, in local districts, key partners have an opportunity to access that data and make use of it.
Thank you for that. Is it the same topic, Councillor Edwards? If not, I've got... No.
Whether my understanding of the situation with cocaine, well, I haven't got one. I'm just trying to find out what is the general situation with regards to, is there a growth in the use of the cocaine, and is it associated with the growth in violence? Is it happening, or is no? Okay.
Sorry, I was just going to say I can't answer that question, unfortunately. I don't have that data to hand.
Is the question you're raising, Councillor, are there other people who might be able to furnish you with that information?
I think just in relation to the specific, is the upsurge in violence linked to use of cocaine? And we just wish to be absolutely honest and say we do not absolutely know that at the present time.
So you've got no answer to, well, you've got I suppose the question that's being posed is, who would be undertaking that? I'm looking to my learned colleagues on the right-hand side.
To understand the link between substance misuse and violence would fall in the scope within the violence reduction unit, but it's not something that we've looked at. So unfortunately, I'm just unable to answer the question at this time.
I mean, at the moment, the risk is you're relying on me reading an article in the Guardian newspaper and talking to someone who looks after the security of the pub nearest to where I take my dog for a walk. You know, I just think somebody somewhere will have a better picture on this, but it's okay. I understand you don't know the answer.
Well, I think you've posed an issue, and maybe it's something that through the commissioner that the VRU unit and others may be able to come forward with some strategy to address the question you're asking.
And I'll just apologise if at any stage you're giving the impression that I wanted to provide information to drug dealers. You know, it's a first for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'll go back to those waiting patiently. Councillor Woodings, thank you for waiting patiently.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to talk about what the preventative measures that have already been in place to divert young people away from knife crime. And I know when there was an increase a few years ago, a preventative programme was put in place for young people who had had friends or associates or school friends and colleagues who'd been involved in knife crime, family members of anyone involved in knife crime, and also anyone, any young people who actually witnessed knife crime as well. So I know there was a programme put in place for that specific cohort of individuals. And I wondered if we had any indication as to the effectiveness of that in relation to outcomes. And the other thing that struck me, and I appreciate, Chair, it's very anecdotal evidence, is that I chaired the remand court for weekend arrests on Monday morning in the magistrates' court, and I was shocked by the number of people coming through who had possession of a bladed article. Some of them young, and some of them with quite significant mental health issues as well. And I appreciate that was just a snapshot of a day in court, but it didn't, I've been on the bench for 20 years as of last year. I hadn't seen that prevalence of cases in such a short period of time come before me. So I just wondered, for how long, I suppose, as far as measuring the programmes that have been put into place, how will you use those outcomes in order to inform future programmes involved with, persuading young people not to carry any form of bladed article with them or other weapon per se when they actually leave the home? How long do you anticipate that we would need to, we would follow up on the success of those programmes? I only say that because I remember speaking to an officer who told me that, he still got calls from women who he'd helped with domestic violence cases some 20 years after they'd been through an incident. There's an ongoing need for support for those people. And if we're talking about young people who have gone through a trauma, how far afterwards are we intending sort of monitoring the effectiveness of the different types of interventions that we're actually putting into place? Are we looking at, I would have thought 3 to 5 years would have been a reasonable, a medium term would be a good indicator as to whether these programs actually did manage to divert those young people from crime. I have got another question actually, and it kind of follows up from the incident in Hackney the other week about the role of our police officers who visit schools every week actually. And I wondered if following the really shocking case, I think it was from Hackney, I wondered if you'd satisfied yourself about the fact that those officers who were, we were told visiting those schools in a community policing basis as a way of giving confidence to young people who might be
possibly witness to or come into contact with or be afraid about reporting crimes, if you'd actually sought assurances from the Chief Constable that those police officers specifically know their remit, what they are and aren't supposed to be doing, when they're actually visiting into the schools as well. So I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chair.
Did you want me to? Yeah. So there are a number of points, Councillor Woodings, that you raised there, and happy to comment on all of those. So in terms of the effectiveness of the intervention that you described, unfortunately, without knowing what the intervention was, I'm unable to comment on that. But I think it must have been pre-VRU, apologies. I can certainly do some digging, but I don't know offhand. In terms of the effectiveness of the collective interventions and partnership activity alongside enforcement, we have seen up until October, so Q3 of last year, a 21% decrease of serious violence in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire compared to the 3-year pre-pandemic average. So we are on a positive trajectory, not that we can be complacent, but we are on a positive trajectory, and that's at odds with other areas of the UK. So I can say that we are making an impact, which is positive. To comment on the increase in possession offences, I would point to the fact that we're actually doing a lot more proactive work in terms of identifying young people that are potentially carrying weapons, which is positive. In terms of the outcomes and informing future programmes and trying to support young people not to carry a knife, we know from the evidence that a lot of young people carry a knife out of fear. So if we can start to bring those numbers down and we can start to actually show a really positive picture in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, which we are starting to see, then that fear will decrease and in turn, hopefully, deter young people from carrying a weapon. But we also have some really positive programmes in Nottingham, like the Choices and Consequences exhibition at the Benkinsella Trust, which takes young people through that journey, and they understand the consequences of potentially picking up a knife and going on a night out versus not doing that, and actually the very different trajectory that their life can take, or the journey of that evening, and therefore their life can take. So I would certainly point you in the direction of that, and it's certainly a resource that we utilise a lot with our youth justice cohorts, and also with our APs, so young people are already potentially impacted by serious violence. In terms of how long we work with young people, it really depends on the needs of the young person. So we don't necessarily give a certain length of time. Often with our custody interventions, it can be 9-12 months that we work with that young person, sometimes 18 months. And it really depends on all the needs that that young person has and the trauma that person's been through and what they need to get in place to get on a positive pathway. So we don't necessarily put a time scale on it. And in terms of how long we track them for, with our current custody programme Divert Plus, young people will be tracked for a period of 10 years to understand that there are long-term outcomes. So it isn't just a short-termism that we're looking to achieve. Hopefully that answers those questions, and I'll just pass on to the Commissioner.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Woodings. I just wanted to provide you reassurance that I regularly meet with the Chief Constable and the senior leadership team, and I'm very confident that situation would not happen in Nottinghamshire. I've also been out with to visit schools with the schools liaison officers and seen how they do increase trust and confidence whilst they're there.
Thank you. Councillor McRae, thank you.
Yeah, just some of the things that people mentioned earlier. I mean, crime figures, we've got a thing in Stapleford as well called the Stapleford Advisory Group. We get figures at them kind of things. But there's also websites you can go on as well that's got specific for your area. It doesn't tell you what street, but like say where I live, Stapleford North, I could zoom in on that and it will just put some figures up on that. So that's interesting to look at things like that, because I think it does the whole country if I'm right. So the information is out there. Someone mentioned the big brother, big sister and the people working together. I think it would be interesting to invite the Kaya group perhaps to come to a future one of these meetings, because they're doing something called the Gentleman's Club, and like I've said in the past, it's not cigars and wine and all that lot, it's actually mentoring. I came up with that name because that's some of my friends do a similar project in New York, and I think it's dead good. So I mentioned that Hyacinth and the Kaya Group, and they're doing it. And I think the funding came from the Commissioner's office in one way or another. So that could be replicated, or get them to go in other areas and do it. It's a really good project. That would be really good to get them to go to something. And then someone mentioned what they used to stop drugs in the pubs and that. And I'll say allegedly, when I was a doorman years ago, it was WD-40 they used to use. So that used to get sprayed on the toilet seats. So I've heard, to stop people doing it, because it'd stop them sniffing, but they shouldn't be doing it anyway. I do say allegedly.
There is a public health issue about using WD-40, isn't there? So don't do that. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any final questions? Well, as I did explain to you, Natalie, that I knew that this was going to provoke an awful lot of interest and comment, and it certainly has done. And thank you and the Commissioner's team and the Commissioner for fulsome replies wherever we were able to do that. I'm sure we'll be inviting you down track to come and give us an update on some of the things that are in your strategy. But for now, thank you very much. Feel free to leave or free to stay, whichever you choose. I'm sure you've got other important things that you can be doing, but you're very welcome to stay should you wish, but it's not compulsory.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I've really actually enjoyed this. So thank you. I will depart because I have got a lot of work to pick up, but thank you very much.
No. Thank you, and I'm sure we'll be seeing you again. So thank you, colleagues. If we can move now to item 7 on the agenda, the Police and Crime Commissioner's Update Report, pages 43 to 76. So I'll hand over to the Commissioner for the start of this exercise.
Can I just echo my thanks to Nat? That was I know. Yeah. Sorry. No, thank you. I did mention it. I have brought a box down with me of police and crime plans in case anybody wanted a hard copy. A copy of the what's going out with your council tax bill, the precept leaflet, and also a copy of the presentation that we gave to the Home Office when they came to visit us last week when Councillor Helen Ann Smith was there. Just a few highlights from my report, please. I would like to draw your attention to the Safer Streets work, which we've since 2020 we've now to £2.5 million worth of Safer Street work project in Nottinghamshire. First, it started with Newark. We got some great learnings from Newark, and then we've done Mansfield, Nottingham, which is the Lenton Arboretum Triangle, and also across in Ashfield and in Worksop. One of the wonderful things about this is it's really given us an opportunity to do some revolutionary work, working with our partners. And if I just mention that the work we've been doing up in Ashfield, we've got a first in the UK of a new safe refuge camera. This is a CCTV camera, really high definition for 4G, and it's got a button on it that you can press, and you can speak straight through to the control room. So if for example, if your phone's run out of charge, or you're in a real pickle and you need somebody to see you straight away, you can talk through to the control room. It's the first in the UK, and that's through partnership work in Ashfield. I think Worksop are having some within the next week or so, and there's been loads of interest for other places in the country. I'd also like to talk about the Safety of Women at Night project. As you know, violence against women and girls is one of the things I'm really passionate about, and we bid to do some really interesting preventative work in Nottingham. You might see a bus or a tram with the Consent Coalition A to Z on it. Now, this is to really make sure people have bold conversations about consent, because sadly enough, people aren't doing. And also Help a Friend campaign, which is on the back of 3 buses, which is going around Nottingham to make sure that people who can signpost if they need help for domestic abuse. So that's some of the exciting preventative work. And just last week, I visited one of our schools, which is doing a healthy relationship. It's this programme, Great Relationships Are Equal and Trusting. And I'm going to do the hand actions, you have to excuse me. But we've got all these 9-year-old kids going 0800 1111. So all the kids in that class knew the child line number. And they knew what confidential meant, which is private but not a secret. Really encouraged to see this being delivered, and I'm excited that we're going to be able to offer this across all the schools in the county and the city. So that's some of the preventative work we've been doing. We had the police awards a couple of weeks ago. I'm always feel incredibly humbled when I see what the boys and girls are doing. It's impressive. And I just want a bit of shout out really, because just yesterday I was thinking, it was Mothering Sunday, and I was thinking of all those mums that were on duty, keeping us safe yesterday, and also all the dads and the brothers and the sisters and the sons and daughters who couldn't be with their families because they're keeping us safe. And finally, when it comes to supporting victims, I just wanted to quickly report back to you on we had an East Midlands Criminal Justice Board before, which was the regional one, and we've now had our second meeting of the Nottingham Criminal Justice Board, and this went really well. CPS came along to the table, as I'd hoped, and we all went away with actions on what we can do to make criminal justice better in Nottinghamshire. So a quick summary, but really happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Michael, thank you very much, Commissioner.
Do you want to add? Actually, can I let my Chief Exec add all the bits I've forgotten? I always do.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I'll try and do this report justice. It was put together by colleague Dan Howard from our office. He can't be with us today for very, very sad reasons. So just to draw to the panel's attention the fact that the updates report are now structured in such a way as to reflect the police and crime plan priorities of prevent, respond and support. And I hope that will be of help to you going forwards. Caroline has already covered quite a lot of detail in terms of safer streets and safety of women at night work. And I think just to add to that, should mention also the partnership launch event at which Max Hill, QC, was present, the Director of Public Prosecutions for the A to Z of consent, and that was put together by the Consent Coalition. That wrapped a number of things up there in terms of awareness raising, just promoting the safe spaces pledges and the involvement of businesses, particularly in the nighttime economy, in just creating safe environments as well. Apart from that, I think you've already had the updates in relation to the Violence Reduction Unit and the strategic needs assessment there, and the need to embed a local youth work strategy as well, and the work that they're doing around Divert Plus. I suppose just in terms of performance, the whole update report is always appended by the performance and insights report as well. So just to draw your attention to the fact that there has been a marginal increase in the number of first-time entrants into youth justice system. Can't give any particular reason for that at the moment, but that will be something we continue to monitor. At 3.7, I think just to show some of the things that are encouraging in terms of performance. So average rates of homicide have fallen by 25% over the last year, and we have one of the lowest rates in the whole of England, which is pretty remarkable and quite reassuring. I'll just move us on to the response section then. And just as part of that assurance work that's done by our office, in order to help Commissioner discharge her duties around holding Chief and Force to account, one of the things that I would like to draw your attention to in 4.2 is the scrutiny of the HMI-CFRS's value for money profiles. And of note is the fact that actually, as a police force, Nottinghamshire spends quite a significant proportion on its front line and on local policing than most similar forces and all forces, the average of all forces as well. So, you know, in terms of public confidence, that's quite reassuring, and that forms part of the ongoing conversations. I think also to draw attention to the fact that we regularly scrutinise force control room performance. You will see that the abandonment rates for 999 and 101 services fell, and that 73 and 79% of all grade 1 incidents are responded to within target time. So again, we've got increased confidence in terms of the police's performance around that. Fraud continues to be a growing problem nationally and certainly locally as well. Commissioner has made some money available to this, but you know, I do wish to let the panel know that we have continued to see increases in relation to online crime activity and fraud activity as well. As I mentioned, that remains firmly in the Commissioner's sightlines, and she has made new funding available in terms of just enhancing local responses to that. And as has been reported previously in the delivery of the Police and Crime Plan, Commissioner set out a particular commitment around tackling rural crime as well. Funding has been duly assigned to that as well. Really quite pleased with the delivery of that in its first year, and that funding will be continued next year and the year after as well. 80,000 per annum has been set aside for that as well. And 4.5 details some of the initiatives that are being used to just to enhance that rural crime offer. That moves us on to the last of the Commissioner's priorities in the support section. And I think just really quite important, and I think this links to a number of questions asked around using the analysis to inform our responses within the Commissioner's office. That is, we work very much in the commissioning and influencing and partnership working space. So we are currently on with quite a significant piece of work on the strategic needs assessment. What that has been used for is an understanding of the victim support contract that is due to be recommissioned, I think, next year, and restorative justice as well. So we imagine that we will get some quite rich data, and from that we will be able to develop a specification which will give us hopefully one of the best services that we can possibly deliver to help victims cope and recover from crime. There's a lot within the Performance and Insight report at Appendix A, which is really encouraging. You will see lots of green dots there, but it would be remiss of me to say, to gloss over the fact that not everything, not all performance is good. And we have to acknowledge, for instance, satisfaction rates amongst victims of hate crime have deteriorated, largely down to reductions in satisfaction with actions taken. Work is underway to address that at the moment. Levels of hidden harm, which is notoriously difficult to measure, but we do try, but it includes really high harm issues such as child sexual exploitation, child criminal exploitation, modern slavery, so-called honor-based abuse, and so on, continues to fluctuate as well. And one of the things that Commissioner was very keen on doing was including hidden harms within her Make Not Safe grant as well. It's a difficult, I don't like to think of it as an entrenched issue, but we have to acknowledge that it is a complex issue that we're still trying to get underneath. I think just in terms of the performance then, and particularly digging into one of the indicators that we continue to speak with the force about, particularly in our conversations with the Chief, is the decline in proportion of respondents in the Police and Crime Survey who feel safe when outside in their area after dark. And we have seen that fall from 63.1% down to 56.8%. There has been quite a bit of subsequent analysis in that, and that will continue as well. That's been seen across almost all demographic groups, but the more significant reductions in feelings of safety have been seen with regard to young people aged 16 to 24, those in full-time education, LGBTQ plus community, people aged 45 to 64, Nottingham City, people from black British backgrounds, and victims of traditional crime as well. That's really quite important, you know, and it's stuff that we're absolutely alive to, the data that we're alive to at the moment. So we're keeping an eye on that. Commissioners already mentioned safety of women at night and the Ashfield initiative, and we had glowing a glowing report from the Home Office when they visited us last week, commending us on the partnership working. And it was completely partnership based, Sutton and Ashfield, and Ashfield District Council rather, and a number of other partners, including police, and our office, all working collegiately around that. Also, just to mention the late night levy and the fact that a strategic needs assessment has been undertaken in relation to making best use of that. We want to be evidence-based, we want to be scientific in the spend of our money and ensure absolute value for money with that as well. Just in terms of organisational developments then, just a few things to pick up. The development of delivery plan, which will accompany the police and crime plan and which will give us a high-level dashboard. That will be used in the forthcoming accountability board meetings and can certainly be brought to police and crime panel in future as well. I've already mentioned the Make Not Safe grant, and I think since we last met we had the formal handover of joint headquarters as well, which is now occupied, and allowing for some fantastic joint working and just collegiate working generally between our force colleagues and fire and rescue service colleagues as well. And then in terms of national developments as well, just to mention the Levelling Up paper that came out 2nd of February. A number of implications there, and I suppose a bit of a read across in terms of some of the things that I will talk about in the Police and Crime Commissioner's review in the next paper. But there are definitely synergies between Levelling Up agenda, the government's own beating crime plan, and certainly the Make Not Safe plan as well. I think that has been an absolute gallop through that report, and hopefully that's given everybody, brought you all up to date in terms of what the office has been on with most recently.
Thank you for the whistle-stop tour there. I've got Councillor Smith and Councillor Woodings. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions, but they are both very different. So if I do this one now, and then I'll come back to my second one a bit later, if that's okay with you. So my first question, Commissioner, is the panel notes the deterioration, in the number of people who have confidence in the police, citing specifically areas where confidence had previously been high but was now converging with the force average. Have we done any analysis to identify whether there are any particular groups who lack confidence in the police and try to understand why? And if so, what plans do you have to target confidence in these groups?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. We've started to do the analysis. Is the honest answer. We need to do more and have more conversations. But it's really important to it's people need to feel safe. So I'll absolutely be following up, and would love to report more back to you next time.
Councillor Woodings and Councillor McRae, thank you.
Sorry, can I just come on back as well, Councillor Smith, if I may? I think I've quoted somewhere, or Dan has quoted somewhere in the report around, we know that certainly events of last year in relation to Sarah Everard, COVID and a number of other things, certainly national reporting is playing into those feelings of confidence with policing generally. It's quite important to us in Nottinghamshire, but I do need to make that point that it's something being felt by police forces everywhere as well.
Yeah.
So sorry, we're doing the local analysis, but we know that national, and that's from our engagement work with a number of national bodies.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if you'd finished giving your answer there, because thank you. In that case, then can I go to Councillor Woodings and then Councillor McRae and Councillor Inglis? Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on the increase in reported domestic abuse crime, which has increased over the last 12 months up to December 21 by nigh on 700 cases. And also, there's a slight difference in domestic abuse repeat victimisation rate, but that's reduced as well. And I think that sort of ties into the Police and Crime Commissioner's survey, which shows that women generally feel, 7% less safe than they did previously, whilst they're out and about in Nottinghamshire. So I suppose my question is, I think these are quite alarming. They're obviously heading in the wrong direction. And can I ask that you have sought assurances from the police that there are no barriers to women coming forward to the police? And do you satisfy yourself about the number of complaints made to the police and the number of times where those complaints actually materialise into actions in the form of prosecutions? Because we know there's a massive issue nationally in relation to women's complaints not being taken forward formally, but also I think I'm safe to say there is a serious crisis of confidence by women in the police and the actions they take, not just following Sarah Everard, but also other instances that have come to light, not just in London, in the horrible WhatsApp messages, misogynistic WhatsApp messages that were being shared between groups of officers there. But I know that we have a case published by the Independent Office for Police Conduct of a case here in Nottinghamshire from November 2020, where an officer was lost his job on immediately, dismissed for gross misconduct, for effectively exchanging messages of a personal and sexual nature with a vulnerable woman that he had encountered in the course of his work as a police officer. And I think the other question I would ask about that, and it is a separate issue, is that a journalist down in Hampshire, because of a council report actually, and I'm going to write to you about this further, and I'm hoping you might come back at a future meeting about this. She got an indication that a police officer down in Hampshire had been sacked after a secret tribunal where a police officer was found he'd abused his position as a police officer to contact women who'd called 999 to report things such as domestic violence, sexual violence, that he had targeted those women with inappropriate approaches to them to engage in a relationship. And in that case, the tribunal took place in private, but there was a belief by the force, which was probed by a local newspaper, that there was an anonymity order in place for that police officer as well. And the journalists actually challenged that in the newspaper, challenged that in court, and they found out there wasn't an anonymity order in place and that the hearing shouldn't have kept secret this particular officer's name. So the journalist's report concluded with how many other officers' tribunals are being conducted in secret and those officers' names are being kept in confidence. And I was going to ask you to seek assurance with the Nottinghamshire police force that that doesn't happen in Nottingham. And my colleague, Councillor Ellis, has handed me the report from the IOPC today of the case that, as I say, arose in November 2020. They made their findings in October 2021 last year. And it says there that obviously the hearing took place in private, but it also says the officer was not named in the hearing, which was chaired by our Chief Constable. And then at the end of the report, obviously it says he did abuse his position. He was dismissed for gross misconduct, quite right too. But it says he's been placed on the College of Policing's list of former officers who are barred from working for the police service. And I suppose the reassurance I would seek in relation to that, or first of all, I would like you to ask the question, why was that officer's name kept a private matter? But second of all, in relation to future safeguarding of other individuals for other services that individual might be employed by, what safety measures and safeguarding is in place to stop any police officers who have been placed on that barred list, barred from working in the police service list? What measures are in place to stop those individuals being employed by other organisations that also support vulnerable individuals who are, again, you know, there might be an opportunity for that person to abuse their position of trust with that individual. So sorry, that's a really long, complicated question, but I think in the light of where we're going, particularly following on from my colleague's question about confidence in the police generally, and the confidence that women can have in the police when they approach the police force, that their complaints will be taken seriously, that they will be looked into, that action will be taken, that prosecutions will be followed up. I think it also speaks to the culture of an organisation as to how they actually deal with individuals who have found to have abused their position of public trust and who have been barred from working for the police service. What responsibility does the police service have to any future employers who might take on that individual? Thank you.
I think, Commissioner, thank you, Councillor Wardings. There's two parts to this, isn't there? There's the broad issue of nationally what's emerging, I think, that doesn't help anyone in terms of getting greater confidence in the police. It's a difficult hill to climb when that sort of thing's happening. But I think there's also the very specific one, which clearly is about an individual, and it's entirely up to you at this stage.
I can talk broadly about this.
Yeah, well, it's a question of whether what I wouldn't want you to do is to breach any original confidentiality issue.
If I can explain the process, it might be helpful.
That would be great.
Yeah, if that's so. If we start off with me and the process, then I think pass over to the chief. Thank you for this question, Councillor Woodings. Violence against women and girls in all its form is not acceptable and want a zero tolerance to it in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. I've been really clear about that, and I absolutely know that reporting domestic abuse is not as high as it should be. We have put together a new VOG strategy for the police, and we have a VOG in our office too. We're pulling it together. It's something we're taking terribly seriously, and I am absolutely determined it's going to get better. And with that VOG strategy, there's absolutely deliverables in there which I'll be holding the chief and his team to account on. With regard to the your second point, really, about public hearings, I just wanted to be clear. It's not secret. There are some reasons when it has to be done not in the public domain. And if I just shared those with you, and also just being really open and transparent about what in Nottinghamshire, it's all on the website. Last year there were 16 public hearings. Some of those were chaired by the Chief Constable, some of them were by a local legally qualified chair, and out of those, only 3 of them were not done publicly, but there was good reasons for that. It could be that there's it's got a child involved. It could be welfare of a third party. It's when it could jeopardise or interfere with criminal procedures. There's a whole list of reasons, including national security. But we try to make the process as open and transparent as possible. And it absolutely needs to be called out if people aren't behaving as they should be. I've also been to the senior leadership team meetings, and I've seen how the chief talks to the team to make sure that behaviour that is not acceptable is called out in Nottingham. And I'm really assured that would happen. I could pass over to you, Chief.
Oh, it's working. Thanks for the question. Yeah. So nationally, I lead on professional standards. I'm also I work on the national VORG strategy as well. So Maggie Blythe does the sort of front of house, and I do the all the PSD stuff. Very specifically, I think you're absolutely right, Chair and Commissioner, around the sort of the national picture with regards to confidence. I think you'll see from our track record, we have put an inordinate number of resources into making sure we improve our response over the years and have done consistently. So stalking orders, domestic violence protection orders, increased resources in public protection, and absolutely have increased the number of evidence-led prosecutions. So this is where you can't get a complaint, but we go with a body-worn video or a 999 call. We try very hard. That bar is extremely high from the CPS, and I think everybody in the room understands that to be a reality. I think in the last quarter we did about 290, something like that. Can't remember the exact number. Right, hearings. Obviously, as the national lead, the transparency is key. If you go on a website, you can see everybody I've sacked and a panel has since I started, and that's unlike any other force that I'm aware of. Secondly, we have a real strong PSD approach, and we try and expeditiously professional standards, and we try and expeditiously exit anybody who has let the public down or let the organisation down. And in particular relevance to the sort of criteria about holding hearings, that's laid down in statute. So it's an entirely a choice for the chair, either me, if it's a fast track, or a legally qualified chair if it's a sort of 2 or 3 day hearing. And that's the way that the law works. I apply the law in each and every case proportionately, take representations, make a decision. On the particular case that you mentioned, I think the Commissioner set out a number of those criteria, and let's just say that a number of those were met. And believe you me, it's sort of top of my priority list.
And sorry, if I could just say, the other point I asked was about, obviously, if the matter's held in private and the individual's name is not released, what measures does the Nottinghamshire Police Force take to protect other potential individuals that person might commit? Because obviously, if you're a sex offender, you go on the sex offenders register.
That's right.
If you have a crime for dishonesty, you have to declare that on a job form. So in relation to, as I say, abuse of public office, what safeguards are in place for future employers to protect any?
So sorry for not answering that bit. The everybody that we've dealt with has gone on the barred list. The barred list is the list that's checked to make sure that people can't return to policing. A finding from a police gross misconduct hearing is not a criminal sanction. However, if somebody applies for another job, they've got to come back to us as the employer, and then we get into reference territory. So in terms of the safeguards are there. The national barred list is what everybody can refer to prevent these individuals coming back into the police. And I think it's a good mechanism that's been brought in, and it stops people trying to return to, say, another force, for example, or to a sort of local authority partner who work very closely with the police. But ultimately, somebody needs a reference, and that's where we step in. But I have to, make the point, it's not a criminal conviction.
That's interesting, because also there'd be a DBS check and an extended DBS check for any individual employed by any organisation who, to check that they were a fit and proper person. So that feels like a bit of a weakness to me. I should also say that stalking orders are actually reduced in the last quarter as well. So obviously you said there's been an increase in stalking orders, but there's actually been a reduction in the last year in the number of stalking orders put in place. I appreciate you'll probably say that's COVID, but
no, it's not.
The welcome increase in DVPNs and DVPOs is very welcome, I should say.
No, it's not COVID at all. It's actually a reduction following some learning from one of the civil cases. Because for those stalking orders, it's the force that pays civilly with the force's own legal department to represent the force in court, rather than the CPS. And some learning from one of those cases indicated that there was other mechanisms that we needed to consider before going for one of those orders in court. So what you can see is from that prevention element that we've got, all those other things that we've done with DVPOs, DVPNs, etc., that's really what we're trying to do to try and prevent further offences. So we took some learning back, but it was nothing to do with COVID.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry, Chair, I don't understand that. DVPOs, DVPNs are when somebody's in a relationship or a former relationship, they take somebody out of the house for 28 days. Whereas I thought the stalking orders were a different sort of entity to that. They last for longer, don't they?
Yeah, they do, but they're a civil order. So with the DVPO, DVPN, that's what we do from a police perspective. But for a stalking order, we have to go to civil court to get that, and it's the force legal department that do that.
Sounds like perhaps something that maybe a written explanation to yourself, Councillor, might be helpful. I just wanted to thank the Commissioner and the Chief for very open comment about obviously things that are very topical at the moment, and thank you for that. And I've got Councillor McRae and Councillor Inglis who've been waiting patiently. Councillor McRae, thank you.
Yeah, just thank you. Right, the panel is pleased to note the reduction in neighbourhood crimes reported in paragraph 3.3 of the report. In part, the reduction is attributed to Safer Streets programme. Please, can you tell us how the level of reduction compares between those areas where Safer Streets has been rolled out and those where it hasn't? Example, as it brought the rates more into line. If those areas with Safer Streets have been brought to a similar level, what response are you considering, either through commissioning of additional services, the way in which you are holding the Chief Constable to account, and the work you are doing with partners? And if those areas with Safer Streets have brought the level below the rest of the county, how do you plan to redress this balance, including any services you may commission, an overview of how you are holding the Chief Constable to account, working with partners, etc. Thank you.
I haven't got all those answers right now, but I just want to assure you that the learnings and what we know has worked really well from Safer Streets 2 and 3 are what we want to put into the Safer Street 4 bid that we're going to be putting through next. So I will be able to follow up on that one, Richard.
Can I just also, I'm like, I always like to thank people. There was an incident in Stapleford over the weekend and the police came out and dealt with it really quick. It did involve a knife. I'm not telling you something you can't find out in the press. And I think they dealt with it really quickly and we got 2 people off the street. So if you can pass that down and say thank you, we're all forever grateful for that.
Thank you, Councillor McRae.
Thank you. Councillor Inglis and then Councillor Smith, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just taking you back to 5.6. We say the frontline funding is proportionally higher than other forces, but it's disappointing to see that people are still having that fear of going out at night. And the report does target the 16 to 24-year-olds. You say you've done some analysis, and that analysis showing who is at fear, but is that analysis saying why they're at fear?
I'm sorry, it doesn't at the moment. That's part of the deeper dive work that we're doing around this to try and understand it better. You're right, we know who, but it's understanding, doing more focus groups. with representatives from those groups to understand what the why behind that.
So one of my takes on it, especially for that age group, is social media and media reporting. We get these sensational headlines, and perhaps that generation don't read into it. You know, and you see those headlines, it does put fear into people. I follow social media on a few villages I cover, and the disproportionate amount of comments are really negative against the police. You know, they're perhaps substantiated, but it's easy for a keyboard warrior just to sit there and criticise the police for not doing anything. So I do feel that is an important factor to look at. We have got a good police force, and I feel, you know, we've put them on the back foot a bit today. But I'd just like to say there is a culture out there that blame the police for everything. You know, we had the incident unfortunately, with Wayne Cousins. After that, every police officer was a potential sex offender, was a bad apple. You know, that's across the whole country for the action of one person. You know, we have got some very good professional police officers who work with integrity and professionalism, and I can say that with knowledge. So I do get my heckles up a little bit when the police are blamed for everything. It's a blameworthy culture that the police, you know, whatever they do, they're going to do it wrong. You know, so I do feel we want to get back. You know, the police are taking these hits. You know, we've got an ex-police chief constable alleging sexual assaults and misogyny within the force historically. That's substantiated. Are we hitting back at that? Are we trying to address the balance that not all the police officers are bad? And put some positive messages out there. We've got the TV media with the police interceptors. That's provided some real good feedback. You know, it shows the officers are out there, they're doing the job, they're catching the baddies, and that's what a lot of the police officers want to do. So I do feel if we're addressing that media hype, then we can perhaps bring that perception down a little bit. So.
Thank you, Councillor Inglis. Well said, I think, and I think many professional organisations feel they are the brunt of negative press. I'm afraid that's just they sell more papers and get more money on the media. I've got Councillor Smith and then Councillor Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sharon, just coming on to something that you mentioned around response times, and that we're hitting targets on those at the minute. What are the response times currently for 999 calls to be answered and for calls to be responded to? I know it's different for urban and rural areas. Yeah, I know it's only a few minutes, but I know it is different. The reason why I'm asking is because a few weeks ago I was in a position where I needed to call 999 in the city, and it took over 4 minutes for someone to answer the call. And then I was on the phone for a further 10 minutes and still no officers actually responded. So I was just wondering what the times were, because from my understanding, it's a lot less than those times. Thank you.
Councillor Smith, as that's firmly in the operational space, do you mind if I draw in my good colleagues behind me?
So you'll have to tell me after what the job was, and I can look into it. But if it's a 999, the average answering time is about 2 seconds, and response times, and that's, you know, consistent across the board. With regards to response times, we have a guide. We try and get to something that's a prompt response within an hour, and for 999s, we try and just get there as quick as we possibly can. The average is, I think, about something like 12 minutes, something like that. But usually, I mean, if you're in the middle of the city and there's a cop nearby, it can be seconds sometimes when we do get there. So I'll take the details after and come back to you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Ellis, then Councillor Inglis. Thank you.
Thank you. Come back to paragraph 4.4 on page 46 about online fraud. The chief executive said that you're cited, the commissioner cited on fraud, and putting 300,000 into that. I just wondered what you're going to use the 300,000 for, and quite how it works. It talks about improving local responses, but we know online crime is an international crime. So how do the two things work together?
The funding we're putting in place, Councillor Ellis, is for a local team, but we absolutely have to coordinate with both the regional and the national team.
Can you tell us a bit more about what the team will do?
It's, operationally, would you like to come in, Chief?
Yeah, I think we're either the 5th or the 6th biggest prosecutors for fraud in England and Wales. And part of the reason that we are is that we've increased the resources quite consistently over the last 2 or 3 years. So the additional finance is not just for the investigation teams; it's also for the prevention. So we have a couple of people that we help, particularly vulnerable victims with if they have been scammed. So quite a lot of that additional cash is going into prevention, as well as a little bit sprinkled across the investigation. But over the last few years, I've increased the number of investigators in fraud.
If I could just give one example, because it's really relevant. Sadly, romance fraud is a really growing issue, and I've spoken to one of the support. I don't know what her title is, but she's one of the fraud prevent, and somebody who highly intelligent older guy had been basically groomed online, and then told a real sob story and was convinced this lady was a real person, and basically took his life savings. But the support that this fraud prevent officer put round helped him get some of his money back, helped him manage to make sure he was safe and not scammed again, and also helped him manage telling his family, because it was a real difficult situation. It's just one example.
Thank you. Councillor Inglis, thank you.
I think I'll leave my questions to next. I've jumped ahead of myself with my notes. They've all run into each other. So.
Oh, it's all right. We're coming to. Is it about this particular paper, or is it?
No, on the next one.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, I'll say then. Are there any further questions on the Police and Crime Commissioner's update report? I think we've had a fair amount of questions and good answers as well. I've got Councillor Introna. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's a comment more than anything. In Bassett Law, we've got a new police inspector, Inspector Crawford, who I met a couple of weeks ago, and I've got to say, she came across as a breath of fresh air. I don't know whether that's because she's not come through the mainstream route to being a police inspector. She's very proactive in the area of violence against women, and following an issue that we had reported in Retford, I'd got in touch with her on behalf of myself and all the lady councillors in Retford, and she's agreed to a meeting straight away, and we're going to be sitting down next week to look at what can be done just to reassure people in Retford and hopefully find some ways to spend some of your money. But I just wanted to say I was so very pleased with what I've heard, the contributions I've had, and the correspondence that I've had with our inspector, and it's with the greatest respect. I'm not going to describe compared to what I saw before, but really, really positive. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Hayley is really impressive. Actually, Hayley is the police officer who came up with the national scheme, Ask Angela, which is now international. She's very impressive.
Thank you for that commendation. If people have exhausted item 7, can we move to item 8, Home Office review of Police and Crime Commissioners, and a load of other papers we've all been dutifully reading, I think. Thank you, Sharon, for doing this report, of a quick whiz through of all the implications. This is obviously the sort of opening gambit, really, isn't it? And I'm sure over the next coming months, we'll be fleshing these out as to what it actually means. Is there anything that you want to raise particularly in the report? Because I think you certainly helped me in my hour of need in trying to understand all the different aspects of the various reports. But I know you've concentrated obviously on this particular report.
So thank you very much, Chair. I suppose I've tried to pull together the synergies between what's been announced in written ministerial statement, bearing in mind members of the panel, that we haven't had a published document apart from something called Annex A that really describes what is going to happen next in relation to the Police and Crime Commissioner's review. However, there were some fairly significant publications that also came out within that week. The Strategic Policing Review was published the very next day. And I'm sorry, I think the version of the report that's been published doesn't include this, but I have included it in the report, the State of Policing report. So outgoing Chief Inspector Sir Thomas Windsor gave his summary of key things in relation to police and crime commissioners, all of which will be of interest to this panel. I suppose what I've tried to do throughout the report is just pull out the key issues. Certainly in Part 1 recommendations, we saw quite significant recommendations around strengthening PCC transparency and accountability, resilience and consistency in the Police and Crime Commissioners model. Government considers it to be very successful as a way of addressing and getting help within local areas, clarification of relationship between police and crime commissioners and chief constables, and the raising of professional standards as well came out in Part 1. I think we certainly got quite a bit more meaty content in relation to Part 2, and I think, Chair, this will be of interest to members of the panel. There are implications in relation to the police and crime panel model mentioned there, and their role in the investigation of any complaints, and then I think further there's just some quite exciting opportunities here, certainly in relation to offender management. Police and crime commissioners have always had the ability within law to do anything conducive and incidental to their role within the bounds of law. However, what's been announced by the policing minister, by Home Secretary rather, is something that really pulls together that strand around offender management and the involvement of the probation service, particularly in relation to the co-commissioning of services. So we see that there's quite a lot of opportunities in relation to tackling offending and re-offending as well. In relation to the crime and justice partnerships, quite interesting that the review talked specifically around putting local criminal justice boards on statutory footing. Happily, we're slightly ahead of the curve here in Nottinghamshire because Commissioner decided to convene a local criminal justice assurance board for that very reason, that there was a strength of feeling locally that we really needed to understand criminal justice system. And I think there's been a growing sort of public awareness of some of the slowdown in the process of justice as it moves through from police involvement and police charge to those matters actually being charged by CPS and then being heard by a court as well. I suppose similarly in relation to the Violence Reduction Unit, it mentions there about clarifying, strengthening the relationship, but we actually have quite a strong relationship. The Violence Reduction Unit sits within the OPCC. However, it is truly a partnership effort, so police are heavily involved in that. Public health partners, as you heard Natalie describe as well. And I suppose then just to kind of look at some of the other things that the review mentioned was undertaking reviews of community safety partnerships and improving their transparency and accountability. And ultimately, why wouldn't we want to do this? It's we are all here. We all have a community safety duty and a criminal justice duty, which is about using our resources to best effect in our local areas for the benefit of the residents there. And then clarification of PCC representation on local government committees. I don't think it'll be any surprise to panel members that there's a number of shared footprints where kind of police and crime panel, police and crime commissioners and police force area overlaps with many different community safety partnerships. So it's just really trying to clarify a lot of that. Then in terms of public confidence, and I think this probably goes to the point that was raised by Councillor Inglis in terms of the trust and confidence and the role of police and crime commissioners in supporting police legitimacy as well. And it is a really important one. We do absolutely have a critical role to play there in terms of supporting, being open and honest about when things are not going well, but absolutely supporting all of the positive news stories and all of the positive communications and doing what we can to just build up public trust in, you know, what remains the best policing model in the world. So we're keeping a close eye on that, and we do continue to work closely with the force in terms of just trying to instill confidence in our communities. That includes our diverse communities as well. One of the things that I think I just didn't get around to including within this report, but was the publication of the Race and Ethnic Disparities report by Dr. Sewell. And again, you know, that's all business in terms of engagement with those communities, having listening mechanisms that we really want to be alive to. So we're looking at that, and I think, you know, I'm happy if panel members wished to bring back a report specifically looking at that to a future police and crime panel in future. Data is noted by it within the review to be of critical importance to police and crime commissioners, and a lot of questions today have absolutely been around that analytical piece and truly understanding the data coming forward. And I think we have now got a digital performance pack that is linked to the national crime and policing measures, and we have just today been given access as an office to that pack as well. But the intention there is to make us more data literate as officers, so that we can read the data as well as possible, and properly be holding our chief constables to account. So I think just a couple more items, if I may, please, Chair. Power of competence, a consultation was done on this very recently, and that looked at whether a general or a functional power of confidence should be given to police and crime commissioners as well. The distinction, I believe, is that a general power of confidence would give a police and crime commissioner the ability to do anything that an individual would be able to do. Not uncommon in local authorities, they have that, whereas functional power gives them the power to do anything that is conducive to delivering their role, basically. Policing protocol order, that's out to consultation at the moment, closes on 2nd of May. It's received quite a bit of publicity, and it's been mentioned in the Strategic Policing Review and Sir Thomas Windsor's State of Policing report. But essentially, the consultation is looking at how do you get that brighter line between what is the operational space and Chief Constable's domain as to where he tasks and coordinates his officers, and then the business of the Police and Crime Commissioner, which is on holding him to account, and then rightly kind of holding performance of the force to account, but also in using monies and assets as well that are remitted to the office too. I think, I mean, I could go on, there's quite a lot of detail in here, but I think if I might just draw a line underneath, recall mechanism has been abandoned, and finally the synergy with the Levelling Up white paper that was released there in February, which is around potential devolution deals as well. And just to say that bringing this right up to date, we see that there are interrelationships between the work of Police and Crime Commissioner's Office and certainly in the work of the local authorities, particularly in relation to health and economic regeneration, for instance. We're not quite clear at the present time how things will pan out, but we have been invited to be part of the conversation, which will be quite important to how things play out in future.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. As you rightly said, it was one of many papers. We were sort of swamped in 1 week, weren't we? But there we go. Councillor Camilleri, I think, wants to come in.
Just, I'd like to commend you on the work with the Criminal Justice Board, because excuse me, because moving children out of remand, or young adults out of remand into the system and getting them sorted is extremely good for the Notts County Council, because every child that is in remand costs this authority up to £10,000 a week, which is a lot of money. So any speed that you can get the Criminal Justice Board to get the cases dealt with quickly will be well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions to the Commissioner or shown on the paper produced? Thank you very much for the précis and interesting times, as you might say, is the best thing for us to say about all these. May we live in interesting times. We note the information. Thank you very much. That takes us to our final paper, item 9, roles and responsibilities of your office, Commissioner.
As head of paid service, you can lead this one for me. Okay.
Okay, so the paper sets out the outcome of the staffing restructure, of which panel members will have been made aware of previously, roles and responsibilities review that was undertaken. And recommendation is that partners note and their panel members note and consider this, and ask any questions that you wish to. And in support of that recommendation is the point that the review has been carried out and a formal restructure is now being instituted within the office, with the primary aim of supporting its broader effectiveness and efficiency, both in terms of delivering its statutory duties, but also its business priorities, those things that set out within the police and crime plan, and then the broad powers that we have, those things that I've mentioned in the preceding paper around the criminal justice duties and the community safety duties that we have in terms of working in collaboration with key partners to make our areas safer. So the establishment, and headlines from this, is the establishment is being increased from 24 to 35 posts. The purpose, the reason for that being that we wish to ensure sufficient capability and capacity within the office in terms of delivering current and emerging responsibilities of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So just in terms of a little bit more detail then, and I think Commissioner inherited a number of vacancies in her office. She inherited a structure as well. That structure had not been reviewed or brought up to date since 2013 as a whole. And there'd been some significant changes in legislation during that time, including the fact that the office had to take on the statutory review of complaints against police for those people who asked for those reviews. Individual posts had been added during that time to ensure that duties had been discharged, but I think it would be fair to say, and I've tried to reflect this throughout the report, the feelings of the individuals within the office and also with those key stakeholder partners that the office works with, is that what we had was really quite a flat structure, duplication in parts, fragmentation in other parts, and just an office that was not working together as a coherent whole. You will see a diagram of the previous structure there, and you can see that there's a lot of reports into Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer. I think a comparison with any Office of Police and Crime Commissioner would show you that to be a highly unusual structure. With so many reports into a Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer. That's not to be critical of that structure, because it certainly did work once over, but given where we are at this point in time, with the busyness within the office and then increasing duties coming forward as a result of the Police and Crime Commissioner's review, it's absolutely important that we get our house in order. I think other reasons that I've detailed going into pages 2 and 3 are around the effectiveness of support to individuals within the office, and also that cross-functionality, appropriate supervision, appropriate hierarchy of responsibility as well. A secondary objective within the roles and responsibilities review was money being paid out in terms of grants to external providers, be they partners such as our community safety partnerships, or in relation to communications and engagement support as well. So those were examined. So all directly employed posts were reviewed. An independent review was commissioned, and the whole office was not just compared nationally, but certainly a benchmarking exercise was undertaken in relation to Nottinghamshire's most similar group, as determined by HMIC FRS. That includes, as 4.9 shows, police forces like Kent, Bedfordshire, Leicestershire, Lancashire, and so on. I've mentioned that the team in the OPCC have been heavily involved in this review. They were undertaken by the independent. They were interviewed rather by the independent reviewer, concluded excellent public service ethos within the team, really strong team spirit, but a team who felt that there was multiple single points of failure due to the structure being quite flat, and all those points that I've mentioned already in terms of silo working, lack of cross-functionality as well. I think one of the key things to flag up to Police and Crime Panel members is that quite unusually we had Treasury Management within the OPCC in Nottinghamshire, which is quite uncommon. That's normally placed across into force finance teams in order to ensure resilience around what is quite a critical function. It's the bill paying and the cash flowing that needs to go on within any organisation, and that's certainly critical within policing and definitely within victim services and the commissioning work that we do as well. I think just to bring in other things that had in between 2013 and where we were in 2021 as well, when the review started to be undertaken, was the fact that we had this huge uplift in Home Office and Ministry of Justice grant funding. Some of that was linked to during the COVID, during the initial pandemic lockdowns and so on, but it's also continued. We've also continued to receive those grants, I think, in recognition centrally that there needs to be greater support to issues like violence against women and girls as well. So as a consequence of that, the OPCC had 1.8 officers managing an already sizable amount of £5 million worth of funding, commissioning that out to partners, grassroots organisations to get support to those who need it. And that, when we looked at that last year, that was actually £12 million, which I think by anybody's measurement is quite a lot being funneled through an extremely narrow pipeline. I've mentioned just to reference as a reference point in this report, also the PCC review and the things going through from that, including public confidence, that data sharing, and the analytical capability, the scrutiny mechanisms as well, consolidating analysis, monitoring police performance, supporting the good news stories, but really being on top of the dips in performance as well, and holding the chief's feet to the fire where absolutely appropriate as well. But then there's also the things like the commissioning already mentioned, and the partnership working as well, particularly around policy work, absolutely critical. That's a bread and butter of the daily work we do, and it's something that our partners are heavily reliant on, because we're providing benefits to vulnerable stakeholders right across Nottingham and Nottinghamshire there. Review concluded with a series of recommendations there. I should say, and those are all detailed at 4.13. I should say we haven't been able to deliver all of these yet. This is work in progress, but you will see within there the recommendations relating to establishing in-house communications, decommissioning of some of the ways that we were administering grants through Safe Knots Board and through Crime and Disorder Partnership at Notts City as well. And then just moving us on to page 5 of the report, the independent review concluded that 4 core function areas were proposed within the new structure. Business management, arguably the backbone of all organisations, that you have good administrative support. Communications and engagement, for those reasons that we've already travelled over in terms of public confidence, legitimacy, awareness raising of campaigns such as Safer Women at Night, Safer Streets and so on. Partnerships and commissioning, huge uplifts have to be supported by properly established function area there. And then the strategy, performance and assurance function area was proposed in terms of all of the analytical and scrutiny work that needs to be done as well. 4.15 describes the new structure, which we'll see represents a much more hierarchical and traditional type structure that we think allows proper pastoral care, proper supervision within those functions, and greater delegation, but also greater cross-functionality between the service areas than was ever able to take place as well. And that includes the Violence Reduction Unit. Natalie, within her presentation, mentioned that a 40% uplift in funding had been received within this year. In terms of supporting the channeling of that funding, which is ultimately, we are held to account by the Home Office in terms of delivery of that. We have put in another project manager there, and I think some of the conditions of grant were the inclusion of a trauma-informed specialist and a youth worker project lead as well. The next pages 6 and 7 deal with these have been included to give the panel assurance that proper processes have been followed within the office in relation to consultation, engagement with human resources, and the engagement with representative bodies, unions such as GMB and Unison, to ensure that they were all cited. And absolutely consultation with staff members affected themselves and those who were not affected, because we felt the communication, in fact this was feedback we received from the team, they just wanted to know what was going on. So we've communicated to them throughout all of this. And they have been cited on all of this. The first consultation, an early engagement event took place with them at the beginning of December there, and then the formal consultation opened up on 19th of January. The final structure has now been circulated and is due to be implemented on 10th of April as well. I think in the spirit of transparency, just to draw your attention to paragraph 4.23, which looks at the role, content and grades of the statutory officer job descriptions. those of the previous Chief Executive and Chief Finance Officer as well. So as part of the review, significant changes were made to those, and it's right that the panel is made aware that the changes for the existing statutory officer holders, it was recognised the changes would be challenging, given the timescale of change that was envisaged. Following discussions with those offers of voluntary redundancy were made to those individuals and were accepted, and they've been absolutely supported by specific business cases as well. Decision notices are in pipeline and will be published, and just to give further assurance in terms of our transparency obligations, all of that will feature in our statement of accounts as well. As a result of the proposal at 424, I have highlighted that 4 individuals were formally put at risk. They have all been engaged with, and during the whole consultation period, we were able to offer them ring-fenced recruitment and matching opportunities as well. We were able to successfully match 1 role holder, which helped de-risk their situation. Again, in spirit of absolute transparency, that person wasn't absolutely happy at being matched to the role they have been matched to and has actually appealed against it, but they have got the opportunity to apply for some of the other newer posts in the office as well. And then 3 individuals that submitted expressions of interest in relation to other new posts in the office, and they have been able to be successfully matched as well. So happily, there's nobody absolutely at risk at the moment within the office. I think, just to give assurance in terms of the engagement process with the team at 426, I detailed some of the feedback that was received during the consultation period. Lots of questions which I've summarised into an understanding of the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office commitment to supporting apprentices, and we've reaffirmed our commitment. We absolutely want to be supporting people to with those entry-level roles and to have those opportunities for progression and development within the organisation. Rightly, people have asked around the driving forward work on equalities, diversity and inclusion. We did previously have a specific project officer post for this within the structure, and that has been disestablished. However, that has been written into everybody's job descriptions because law provides that we are all actually responsible for that. We do recognise that we are not there yet as an office, and we need to do much more in terms of getting fully up to speed around equalities, diversity and inclusion as well. I think in-house provision for communications and media work as well. There's a lot of initiatives that get channelled through our office. Our violence reduction unit alone takes up a lot of comms activity, but also Safer Streets, rightly so. Home Office do expect quite a lot of awareness raising around that. And then the other work that we're engaged in within the OPCC. We have actually analysed this and do expect that by establishing in-house expertise, we will have much more resilience, and we will actually achieve some efficiencies and savings happily as well. And then I suppose just in terms of the transfer back to the force of things like treasury management, and I should say core financial management functions, the transfer of those back to the force. And I think because we've had a status quo within our office, people, especially those involved in budget management, have just asked for assurance in terms of the strategic service level arrangements that we will have in future. And we have fortunately had a joint chief finance officer, so have been able to lay quite strong foundations in terms of the relationship that we would expect going forward. I think just in conclusion, I just wanted to draw panel members' attention to the fact that the team in the OPCC absolutely welcome this. When you look at the activity that they've been charged with, and when you look at how we have been faring in comparison to more similar OPCCs as well, they've definitely been under-resourced and overperforming, but that's clearly not something that's good for health and well-being and not sustainable, so they absolutely welcome the uplift. So, and I think just finally to say that we are right in the middle of recruitment right now. You know, and as much as I'd like to give assurance that, you know, next time we come, we will have a fully functional OPCC, but as a head of paid service and somebody who's managed these processes before, I think it's only right to say that there's got to be a period of bedding people in, getting the dynamics, kind of the cultural piece in the office right. So we do anticipate it will be some months yet before we're properly on our feet as an office. But in the meantime, we will be continuing to deliver all of those functions that we are responsible for.
Thank you, Shara, for a very fulsome report. I think I've got three people now. Councillor Smith was first, then Mr. Vaughan Newton, and then Councillor Woodings.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for that, Sharon. I appreciate the in-depth report you gave there. I do have one concern question. I've just been reading through the financial implications and doing some very quick maths. Now, it's not my strong suit, but with the savings that you projected to make with bringing the communications department in-house rather than using external, there's still going to be an additional cost to the OPCC of £219,900. Commissioner, what assurances can you give that that's going to give us best value for money? Because that is quite a large amount of money that we're talking about of increased fees to the department, and I'm just concerned that we're not going to see bang for his buck, if I'm honest. So what assurances can you give to us that we're going to get best value for money through this restructure?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Well, we've talked about how we need more analysts. We've talked about policy. We've talked about how much more commissioning we need to get out, and also, you know, our programme manager. You've seen Phil Gilbert in action, and how much work he does, and how actually by the work he does gets us more money. So, you know, what more will we get for more? If we have a full team running on rails, how much more could we do? But value for money is front and centre to what I'm doing, and I'll make sure we deliver more because we've got more people to do it.
Just really quick, if I may, Chair. Well, in that case, Chair, could I suggest at this point, I don't know if I can, that in 6 months' time, or we come back and have an updated report to see the progression that we're making with the changes to the staffing structure, with your approval?
Yes, I think the thing is probably to come back when it's more or less done and dusted, because if we just give a timescale, you might not have achieved all your post-filling. But yes,
because we've got to get the people in, and we've got to give them chance to bed into, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's why I said 6 months, but 6 months, 12 months, however, whatever time frame, if or whenever they're ready, but just to give us that bit of a benchmark so we can see what improvements are being made. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughan Newton.
Thank you, Chair. You've obviously put a lot of thought into the welfare of the staff affected at a time which must have been very difficult for them all. There's another factor at play, though. There's a relocation from Arnott Hill Park to Force Headquarters. Has everybody been happy with that?
I can. Yes, by and large. So we had to do a separate consultation process with them, with unions, and with HR on that as well. Again, it represents change, and people, you know, raised their concerns about that. But you know, we are obliged as public office to try and achieve value for money. And the fact is, we are in an old building that's far too big for us, you know, and that is not an efficient and effective use of space. So by moving to force headquarters, we feel that that will give us all the benefits of co-location, albeit in a nice sealed off area to protect our status as corporate sole. We'll get all the benefits of that, and we will make more efficient use of the space there as well.
And may I just add, we have a fantastic team who've been working the socks off, but it's not sustainable for them to carry on doing what they were doing. There's genuinely too many cracks. There wasn't enough resilience, and it was going to break, and that was a real risk. The team welcomed the fact that we're adding to them, genuinely.
Thank you. Councillor Woodings, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the headline of the report is that the staffing of the OPCC Office Commissioner is going to increase from 24 posts up to 35 posts. That's an addition of 11 posts. And according to the report, that's a net increase in funding of the office by £465,000 per annum. And that includes presumably the 2 officers that it says have been tupied over to the Nottinghamshire Police to deal with treasury management and payments, etc. Will you be sharing the review of effectiveness that took place? And I only say because I hadn't heard previously that there was any indication that the services were subpar in any way. And also, you're asking for 2 analysts and a team leader to do the work of analysts currently employed with the county, I can't think of the word of it, CSP, Crime Safety Partnership, the Crime and Drugs Partnership for the city, and also the OPCC as well, which feels like a reduction in analysts overall. So how will you fill that gap? And I think that's sort of my overall query really about that.
Yes, so in terms of sharing the review, I think the intention was to publish that alongside the decision notice. I think when we looked at this and just looked what we got out of those partnership analysts, we felt that with the PCC review, in fact the independent review concluded this, most PCCs are now starting to develop in-house analytical capability, bearing in mind that we have got to be much more data literate in future in terms of properly analysing force, scrutinising force performance and so on. And obviously the office has been funding those partnership analysts in the community safety partnerships. We felt that if we took over, I suppose, direction and control of those by having them in-house, we could get more bang for our buck doing that and gain more efficiencies just by really directing their work, but by sharing that, continuing to share that with our community safety partnerships and police as well.
So just to clarify, there is an overall reduction in the number of analysts generally being funded, but you feel that by bringing it into the OPCC, because obviously you talked in your report about recognising the fact that individuals in the office are, felt very heavily loaded, and that although they were working, like the clappers, that wasn't a sustainable thing for the future. And sort of in contrast to that, you seem to be saying, well, it feels like there's an overall net reduction in the amount of post-analysis posts that will take place, or analysis work, full-time equivalent, that will take place as a result of this centralisation of resources within your office.
I don't think there is a reduction. I think we're funding 2 partnership analysts, one in SNB and one in CDP, bringing those roles in-house, but we're also adding the research and insight manager posts, so there should be more analytical capability than we've currently got at the moment.
Okay, Thank you.
I think the thing is to look at this a little bit down track, isn't it, really? Because often with such major implementation of change, what you think might be the right thing, my experience is sometimes down track you have to do a bit of tweaking or even some substantial tweaking. But thank you for the report and bringing it today. If there are no further questions, sorry, I've got Councillor Ellis and Councillor Introna.
Oh, there I am. Mine isn't a question as much as a comment, and thank you for the report. I mean, the headlines, as Councillor Wooding has said, is a 50% increase in staff and a 50% increase in the cost of the office. Now, local authorities have been through and are going through a budget process, and anything that implies a 50% increase is very unusual. And we'll be deeply envious of it. But I've been trying to square three particular things. Earlier on in the report, we talked about the VFM profiles, saying the high proportion of funding on frontline and on local policing, which is where, as a panel, I'm sure we'd want to see the funding. The report talks about benchmarking most similar groups, and compared to other OPCs, Nottinghamshire was lean and mean. They're my words, but we're going away from that. We're now going to increase the staff and increase the costs of the office. And you campaigned on a proposal not to have a deputy, as you were campaigning to save the costs, to reduce the costs of the PCC. And here you are, the first opportunity, and it's 50% increase. I just struggle to square all those different elements and make a coherent strategy from it. What I would say, picking up some of the other comments, is partnership working is important, and getting analysts is important, and it is important that we get one version of the truth. So it is really important that those analysts work across all the partnership, across all the CSPs, not just the SMB and the CDP, but the in the county, the local ones, and certainly from the panel's point of view, we'll feel more relaxed about asking for more information from your office, given you've got all this wealth of people able to provide it. Thank you.
I'm very happy to come back if you'd like me to, Councillor Ellis. Value for money is really important, and we need to remember that this is £250 million that goes through our office. It's £250 million that comes to the police every year, and I think it's really unusual to have such a tiny office. When you compare with other police and crime commissioners, we were nowhere near, and we can deliver more for more. I will be bringing more money in so we can do more. And I'm still absolutely committed to make sure that the frontline gets as much as the chief wants. I'm still committed to not have a deputy. None of these positions are anything like what a deputy would be doing with me. This is the engine that will be running the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner. As a Police and Crime Commissioner, it's my job to set the strategy and make the decisions, and a deputy will just support me with that. That's not something I'm going for. And thirdly, it's partnership analyst. It's going to do what it says on the tin. Those positions are absolutely there as an analytical resource for our partners.
Thank you. Councillor Introna, thank you.
Thank you. Just very, very quickly, just for clarity, it says the cost of the previous structure was 1.08 million and the cost of external contracts 280k. Is that 280k as part of the 1.08, or is that an additional 280k? So the total costs at the moment are 1.36. Right, okay. Because if it's 1.36, then even at 1.54, that's an 180k uplift, providing that everybody is at the top of the grade. No, I'm just saying it's only an 180k uplift, even if everybody was at the top of the grade. So it's actually a 13% increase in costs, not 43, for a 46% increase in people. Now, proof of still in absolute terms, it's still a significant number, and obviously the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. But I think it's just worth pointing out. It's not a 50% or a 40% increase, it's 13. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards, thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting some of the vogues that there are in management, aren't there? I mean, it weren't long ago that everybody said what a wonderful thing flat management structures were, because flat management structures meant news got around quicker and stuff like that. I was always a bit sceptical because in my limited experience as a project manager, I was always told that you need to spend 10% of your time reporting upwards and 10% of your time reporting to each of your people who report up to you. And I just had a look at the old structure and it found that you got 10 reports down. So that was your whole job gone before you even decided to report to your manager. Maybe that maxim doesn't apply. But there is a real sense of not really a sense of what the outcomes are from this. That's what I get from this. I get a real sense of, oh, well, there's all these roles to play, but it's not clear to me what the outcomes are. And I think that's what's kind of missing in all the talk to me, is that sense of this is what you get that's extra, this is what really comes through. And that would be the point I would make about that. I mean, I've sit and listened to things like this is the best, this is the British police model is the best in the world, and oh, crikey, you know, where's the evidence for that? And, you know, just when you think about how other countries do much better in terms of democratic accountability. And that wasn't long ago when I was a county councillor and we had a police committee. I've got to say, I thought it was a much better arrangement than what's being built up now. And they're having to build things on top of things, aren't they? And then academies for schools, when we used to have local education authorities that really brought all those cross-cutting things together all the time. So I think there are a lot of things going wrong in the way we deliver public services in the country. But I'd be a bit unfair to load that on your shoulders just at the moment. I would simply say, do have that sense of what are your outcomes, your outputs that you want from this, so that you've got something to talk about in a year's time when we next evaluate it. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. You can come back if you wish, Commissioner, but let me just say, the statement you made wouldn't necessarily be agreed by everyone in this chamber, I'm sure, and that's not why we're here. Actually, this is about the Commissioner's office. I think people have made some good comments about, are you sure that we can see that you're doing value for money? There's been some extra analysis and data provided by Councillor Troner just to show what the difference could be. I think the thing is, if we park it there and an update is brought at a time that we can discuss outside this meeting. I'm conscious that we've overrun our time considerably. I'll put that down to the questions to the VRU unit. But I think it's probably a useful point to draw the committee to a close. Can I thank everyone for your forbearance and running over, and see you all in June. Thank you.